I'd like to get started with a simple question, probably not so simple. When exactly does life begin? Nana?
So from my perspective, I think that life begins when we start having life, when something becomes animate, alive, functioning. I think that there are very few things on this planet that are not actually already alive. And I think that when we talk about life, that people frame the question as where does life begin? But I think the question really comes down to balancing or a decision about which life is going to be the life that controls, or which life is going to be the life that you're more focused on. And, we do it with animals that people eat, and we do it with plants that we cut, which also are living and alive, and we cut them and put them into a vase and move on with our lives. And I think that, the issue really for me is who gets to decide, and how does that decision get to be made?
So life for you begins when objects become physical? Is that what you're saying? When we can touch them, when we can see them?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think that the fetus in the womb is life. I have no problem with the fetus in the womb being life. And I also have no problem with a person deciding that they're not going to give birth to that life. I don't have a problem with that. I don't shy away from the idea that the fetus is life. It's okay, it's life. And we make decisions every day about continuing with life, ending life in ways that somehow are not as controversial.
Okay, well, we'll certainly get to that momentarily. Catherine, when does life begin?
At conception. When the egg
the moment the sperm hits the egg for you.
That's right. That's right. And it's even shown in science. I don't know if you've seen one of the videos that shows what happens when that egg and sperm unite. It's like a firework explosion happens inside the woman's womb, and that life begins. Some people want to objectify the child and say, well, it doesn't begin until, like you mentioned a few moments ago, you can touch it. Others believe that it's after the heartbeat begins, but I believe it's at the moment of conception. You have a life.
Yeah. Marcia, how you feel about this?
Yeah, so I am probably like Nana. I don't run from life. Life starts when life starts. My conversation probably is more along the line of bodily autonomy, who controls what that life is going to look like, or if that life is going to go to full term. I'm more concerned with how do we value life. That's a huge conversation for me. But life is what it is, and life starts when it starts. I wouldn't dare argue that.
Oh, interesting perspectives, because a lot of people who talk about this conversation of abortion, the argument begins with life and where it is. So it's interesting that there is no argument about when life begins here.
Viability, and there's a lot that we can talk about here. Viability, is it viable at conception? No, it's not viable at conception. So there's so many ways that we can have this conversation. But the one thing I think, and I'm not a doctor, I don't play one on television, but life starts when life starts.
I do. Ryan, you say what?
Well, I say what scientists say. I mean, there's a great study out that actually surveyed 5,500 biologists, and 95% of these biologists all agree there's a consensus that life begins at conception. So it's really not a point to even argue, although there are many people who do. And then some people want to play the game of semantics saying, well, it's not a person. But see, the problem is every human is a person and every person is a human, period. And so when we get to be the arbiters of whether or not someone gets to live out that life, that's the dangerous thing. Throughout history, when any group of human beings gets to decide you're not a person or you're not human enough, it leads to disastrous consequences. So we all know when life begins. I do appreciate that the women here who they're not on the same side as Catherine and I, at least they agree, I think, about the biological answer to that question.
Well, it's interesting. I actually never really had an opinion about where life begins, and tonight I'm learning myself.
Hey, it's a great thing. We can learn from each other.
And I don't think the main question here, I don't think that for the better part, I think people who support decision making or bodily autonomy, I don't think that we are arguing when life starts. We're arguing bodily autonomy. We're arguing folk having this right to make decisions about their bodies at that time. I don't think, I mean, realistically, nobody would, I can't say what realistically nobody would argue. I would say realistically what I would not argue. And I sit here and I have conversations and fight for people to make decisions that about their bodies for them at that time. And also how valuable, just how much do we value life in this country and in this time?
Yeah. And the reason I have to start with the question is because I want to see where we are from that perspective before we can move on and have a viable conversation and know from what perspective everyone is speaking of, because that's the first thing that'll pop up. Well, life really begins. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about that bodily autonomy. And Marcia, since that's where you stand and you brought it up, what is that all about? What does that mean?
So bodily autonomy is the right to govern what happens to your body without coercion or without influence. It's just that simple. It just means that I decide when and how and what will happen with my body. I decide if I'm going to have sex, if I'm not. Anything outside of that, you've removed bodily autonomy. I decide if I get pregnant, if I'm going to go full term with a pregnancy. I decide that. Nobody get to decide that for me. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with it, but you don't get to decide what that looked like. And I have a right to make that decision for myself.
I have a feeling that Catherine would disagree with that. Why don't you think a woman should have that right?
You've just cut a whole nother person out of the equation. Who fights for the baby? Because the baby is a person. Who fights for that child in the womb to have life? None of us would be here without giving birth to the life that's conceived in us. Now, as a believer in Jesus Christ, Jesus said, the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. There's nowhere in there that it says that once you are fruitful, you get to decide, well, I don't want to be fruitful, so I'm going to strip that life out of me. And that equation, that bodily autonomy discussion doesn't include the discussion of what happens to you, to your body, when you make that decision. It's not without consequences medically, physically. There are consequences to the abortion decision that will impact you, maybe not today, but at some point down the road, you will pay a physical price for many women and for your future children that you do decide you want to bring to birth.
But Catherine,
but you know what I think?
Catherine, go ahead, Nana.
I mean, I think that the part that when Catherine is talking about not considering, or people not considering the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, I push back against that and say, no, actually, that's all being considered. I was pregnant before I had a child, and I remember there was physical, spiritual, and emotional pieces to that too. And, I'm just getting the brother out. You know what I'm saying? So he's just moving. That's something that you're going to have for the whole rest of your life. You're right. My father is still dealing with the physical, spiritual, and emotional pieces of dealing with the child, and he's not a woman. So the reality is that birth does not give you some kind of...
I don't understand what that means. I don't understand what you mean. That
I believe she's saying that you said that there's an emotional damage that comes with having an abortion.
Not just emotional, there's a physical damage.
And what Nana is saying is that there's emotional and physical damage either way you choose. There's still things that you have to deal with.
I
And
don't
there's
think
nothing
the
that you
physical
opt
damage,
out with.
I
There's
don't,
nothing that you opt out with that. It's no physical damage for some people. For some people, it's a lot of physical damage. Some people actually get told there's going to be a lot of physical damage, and they make a decision based upon that. Or they decide themselves that they don't want to go through that physical process. But I think, when we're talking about what is being considered, there's a tendency to try to simplify the argument or the mind of the person who is uh, in favor of people being able to make decisions, to make it seem as if you're not considering that there's this life that's now being destroyed. You're not considering these other things that happen. People are making those considerations.
This
right.
People are
conversation,
looking
Many,
at human
I wanted
dignity
to
and
say that.
saying that it's about human dignity. It's about your capacity as a human being to make decisions for yourself. For those people that don't want to do that don't want to have abortions, just like there's people that don't want to have children that are plenty fertile and can do so, that's their choice. But it is also someone else's choice to say, I'm not going to carry a child to term. That's not for me. And I think human dignity and the respect for human dignity requires us to respect that position.
Yeah, but
Right.
human dignity is inherent, which means it begins when we begin. And so I have to ask the question, well, when does bodily autonomy begin? When does this magical bodily autonomy begin? And when does it end? And why does it end at birth? Why does it end, for instance, Peter Singer, a bioethicist who says that you should be able to abort children up to ages 3 and 4 years old. So why does bodily autonomy end at birth?
No.
I mean, what about my bodily autonomy as a father? I give up my body. I give up myself for my children. I sacrifice for my children all the time. This is what parents do. So this concept that bodily autonomy gives you the authority to end another human life that deserves the same dignity that you deserve, to me is it's a foolish argument, because then bodily autonomy, there are lots of things that dictate what we're able to do with our bodies, by the way. For instance, right now, the pandemic, and I find this interesting because those who subscribe to supporting abortion are in large part the ones who are advocating, everyone else be forced to wear a mask. Well, I thought it was my body, my choice. But yet I'm being forced to wear a mask out in public. So that whole bodily autonomy and that my body, my choice really disintegrates.
It don't
because there are many things that we cannot do with our bodies toward another human body.
Go ahead, Marsha.
It just do not disintegrate. And bodily autonomy, I just want to go back to the statement that was made about an abortion if somebody's 3 or 4 years old. No, I'm not even going to have that kind of a conversation. That don't have anything to do with bodily autonomy. And bodily autonomy don't just start when a person is pregnant and when a person in. I think when I spoke period about whatever decisions are made about your body. There are plenty of people out here who have chosen to not wear a mask, right? They have that right. I'm going to wear one because I want to make sure that I'm okay, but I'm not forcing anyone else to wear one. Bodily autonomy don't start at a specific time and it don't end. It is not just about people determining or making decisions to have a right to choose to have an abortion. It's not that simple. And I wanted to just go back to talk about the fact that we say abortion, a person who makes a decision to have an abortion, that they don't put energy into what's the decision, where that's going to take them. We talk to women all the time, and they don't just run in and say, and by the way, we do not provide abortions at the Afia Center, but women do not run in and say, you know what, I just want to get an abortion. No. People think this through.
But there are many women
thought that go into this before they just have an abortion. They weigh all of their options. There's a lot of options that's weighed here. And then a decision is made. And it is not just a decision that people just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do it. There's lots of thought process. There's lots of sacrifice that happen. There's a lot of stuff. I do disagree with the physical piece of it. If a person have a medical abortion, because an abortion is a medical procedure, there should be no reason that a woman don't have children later. I know too many women who've had abortions and have a full family.